Okay, so click this. We continue to be on Lamed Chesed and Aleph, and hopefully today we'll move forward. We wanted to review one more time some questions, I think, on that sugya. So we'll pick it up from Lamed Chesed and Aleph. Okay, exactly where we are. We're at the Meisvei, about a little above the halfway point, not quite halfway. The Gemara ends at the last line, Guzma Ba'alma, when it talks about the machlokes and bringing down Rabbi Yochanan with regard to the question of whether or not the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel applies by when we have the normal attrition or shrinkage, if you will, of food that normally sort of goes bad because of its natural state. It dries up, it gets a little bit smaller, or whether it's excessive. And again, we're going to see in a couple of blocks when we learn the more detailed Gemara that tells us what shrinkage applies to what foods, because some foods have very little and some in the normal course shrink a little bit more. So the Gemara says Guzma Ba'alma, that when the Tanakhama says that it refers to the normal amount, that Rav Kana, who says Tisha Kavan Kav Shalom and Tisha Kavan Shel Chavero, really only means that it refers to his normal shrinkage. When a person's shrinkage goes beyond normal, even Rav Kana, who says a person likes his own more than he likes someone else's by a large margin, he would agree that the spoilage that happens to his personal food, to his personal like, shouldn't interfere with the fact that he should sell, the shomer should sell that food if it gets to be more than the normal. All right, so Rav Kana is might on that. All right, so we're really going to focus on this Meisvei because I think there was a number of people who had some questions. So we're going to try to go through this one more time with clarity and then move on. Says the Gemara Meisvei. So we'll bring a raya from a brisa. Okay, so we said, if you want to go back to the earlier part of this daf, we said that what's the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rav Shimon Gamliel. So in the Tanakama, the reason why you cannot sell is either because of Rav Kana's reason, Adam Rosa, the Kav Shalom, Matisha Kav Shel Chavero, or the more not acceptable, but the one we understand a little bit better is that a person may wind up making trumas and maasros from what he possesses for food elsewhere, and he'll run into a serious problem because what he'll make is truma and maaser, he'll dedicate it as truma and maaser in order for the rest of the food not to be tevel, and the shomer will not be aware that he made it, and he may sell truma and maaser to someone else. That's the real chashash. The real chashash is that what he's selling, if he were to sell, if we would allow him to sell when the produce starts going bad, he's going to sell truma and maaser because the owner made it. He already designated it as truma and maaser. So the Gemara says that because you don't sell it, therefore the fichach, that was sort of the hook, because you can't sell it, therefore the owner is allowed to make truma and maaser because it's not going to be sold, right? We designated that the Tanakhama says you can't sell it. And now that you know you can't sell it, you can make truma and maaser without, it's like worry-free. I can make truma and maaser, I don't have to worry about anything because I know he's not going to sell it. So now we have this brisa, and this is where we're going to take off. Meisvei, it says lefikach balabais osa truma masa al mokam acher. Because he's not selling it, the owner can, the shomer can make, the owner can make truma maaser for his produce because he knows the fellow won't sell it.
Because the truma and maaser, does that be effectuated only by designating orally, or does it have to be physically delivered?
No, he can actually designate it orally.
Just orally.
Orally, and say this batch that is under the possession of my friend Ruvain, who is watching it, is Truma and Meiser. And of course, then he has to give it to Truma Meiser. And now everything else that he owns, and we said he owns it in another jurisdiction, and that's where his field is and the bulk of his produce. Now that's all free to be given away without reservation, because the Truma Amasa portion was already designated. You don't have to have given it, Richard. You can just have to have designated as Truma Amasa.
So it's pretty easy to make something non-tevel. The process of making something non-tevel is easy. Boom, boom, boom.
But exactly right. But not.
Okay.
But then at some point he has to effectuate it, because he has to give it away to a Kohen and a Levi. He can't just let it sit there forever. But we give him a reasonable amount of time after he says this is Truma Maser. We give him a reasonable time to go ahead and give it out.
Okay.
Right, but the flip side, which of course is part of the concern here, is that on the one hand we say, oh wow, it makes it so easy to get rid of Tevel and solve the problem. But the flip side is that once you designate it, that stuff, if it's used improperly, is a more serious problem.
Correct.
Than Tevel.
Correct, because now someone will eat. Someone who is not supposed to, who's not appropriated, will eat Truma Masa. So that has to be safeguarded carefully. So the person who is designated, that shomer, if you will, he's going to have to ensure that that's given away pretty quickly to a Kohen for Truma and Maser, the Levi, in order not to confuse or make a problem. But there's no problem with the other food being used first, because it's not Tevel, before it's given away. It's just that there has to be, as we say, toch kedei kach. It has to be within a reasonable time. The Torah doesn't designate a day or an hour, but it says, okay, now that you were mafresh Truma Maser, give it away. Just give it away. You know, you've already done the deed. Don't delay. But it doesn't prevent the rest of the food from now being non-tevel, and that can be used, without a concern of what's going, whether he actually gave the other away. But that's, again, is a practical matter. The Gemara tells us here, everything should be done in, with mizrizus. You shouldn't delay. So says the Gemara, the fikach balabais osa truma masa al mokamach. Frek the Gemara v'lechash dil mahavala yosem mekidei chesronan. Now here's the problem. What happens if the produce that is left, in other words, the produce that he's holding is spoiled more than the nominal amount that we talk about, the zavinu? So what's going to happen is the shomer is the one who is in charge, and he sees, oh no, this food is rapidly deteriorating. I better sell it quickly, because otherwise the owner will have a major loss. So he doesn't consult with the owner. So there's no communication here. This shomer, this fellow holding it, says, I've got to do something quickly. V'zevinu, and he quickly sells it. So now he sells the produce before the owner knows or has done anything with it. V'ka'achol tavalim, and now you're eating tevel. Why are you eating tevel? Because there was no designation. The owner thought, oh, I have time to designate. The shomer gets up in the morning, he sees this creep of destruction on the produce, and he quickly calls up a fellow and says, I'm going to give you a bargain. Here, go ahead and buy all this. And he buys it. Nothing has been mastered yet. And now the owner is going to say, no problem. He calls up his ranch back in wherever and says, start distributing. There's no problem. Why? Because I'm giving Truma Maser. Well, he can't give Truma Maser because that food has already been given away. So now you're going to have a chain reaction where everything will be tevel, because he will not have given Truma and Maser because of the fact that the spoilage happened too quickly, and the shomer got rid of it before the owner could give Truma Maser. So the sequence of events has been totally kicked out of sync. And now we're going to have a big problem with tevel, right? That's the concept.
And the shomer's not allowed to give Truma and Meiser.
No, the shomer can.
Field.
Right.
That's
right. So the shomer is just preserving the owner's wealth and he's doing him a favor, but by doing him a favor, he's taking it out of the Truma and Maser sort of arena, and now everything else is Tevel. Because the only way you rely on it is if the owner makes Truma Maser on what this fellow's holding, now everything is kosher. But if it goes out of sync because of the accelerated deterioration, now we no longer have the ability of Truma Maser.
Why can't the shomer, why in this case, why can't the shomer do something to benefit? Because it would benefit the owner.
Because the
if-
owner has to give it.
I
Yeah,
understand.
the
but
owner has
why-
to give it, not unless he.
Why
yeah.
can't somebody be a shliach for Truma and
But he
Meiser?
didn't make him a shliach for Truma Maser. He did not make him a shliach for Truma Maser, so he can't go out of school and say, I'm going to do him a favor. I'm not only going to sell it to preserve the spoil that shouldn't spoil, but I'm going to do Truma Maser. Where do you come off giving Truma Maser on someone else's? Then it would be totally responsible.
Can somebody make a shliach for Truma and Meiser?
Yeah, no. If for some reason you can't give it, and you say I'm making a shliach on my behalf to give Truma Maser, you can do that. But he has to articulate it, and here he didn't articulate it.
Okay.
So the Gemara gives an interesting answer, and the Gemara says, and so this is now the direction we're going, that Yosef Michdei Chesron lo shchiach, that accelerated sort of depreciation or accelerated loss on these foodstuffs is not normal. Lo shchiach. It doesn't happen normally. So we don't have to worry about the whole thing being thrown out of sync because it doesn't really apply, because it doesn't happen. It's a metzias that we can talk about, but doesn't really happen. So we're not worried that there will be accelerated damage, and therefore it'll kick off this whole chain of events and it'll wind up eating tevel. Frek the Gemara the okay, you're telling me it's not shchiach, but now answer me, what happens if it does happen? Okay, so I understand it's not shchiach, but what happens is if it happens, so give me a good answer. Tell me what would be the prescribed way of doing it. If it actually happens, so the Gemara says masvina lahu. Then he should go ahead and we sell it. Okay, so then we sell it right away. So in other words, even though you don't normally sell the produce, if in fact it happens, he can go ahead and sell it. Right? The Mishkacha Masvina lahu. Freika now freik the Gemara. The Leicha Shema Osm Balabais Truma Masa Amakam Acher. Now that we say that he's allowed to sell it, what happens if he sells it before the owner makes Truma and Maser? Not because he wasn't aware. They're not in the same jurisdiction. Let's say they're in a different town or whatever. So the shomer gets up and sees this is really happening. He quickly sells it to get whatever produce he can, whatever money he can. And then the owner gets up and says, you know what? Now today I'm going to make this produce Truma Maser. He doesn't know that the fellow has sold it, and he's going to make it Truma Maser. And he can't because it's no longer in his possession. He no longer can make it Truma Maser. Now we're going to have a serious tevel problem because he thinks that he's making Truma Maser to pater the rest of the produce from tevel. And in point of fact, it's not. Now that's the real kasha.
Rabbi, don't you have two very low probability events happening in the series?
Well, why two? The one probability that it doesn't normally happen is the accelerated depreciation, and we acknowledged it, and we said, but what if? But what if?
Also,
What's
the
the second?
boss, does he will get up and say, I'm going to make Truma Masa?
No, but
something
no,
that somebody
you
else
can do that at any
watching.
point in time. That's not a low probability. That's probably a high probability. The question is when. The question is when.
I actually could see a scenario where both these could happen for the same reason. Okay. Normally in Israel, we have very consistently dry weather in the summer. And then around Sukkot time, etc., it starts to rain. And now we have all kinds of stuff. What if it doesn't rain? But let's say instead, maybe it rains a little bit early. So the guy's watching the forecast. The guy says he's going to be back in, October, whatever, figure he'll be back before the rains. All of a sudden, forecasts start coming out that there's big rains coming soon. So the guy who's he's now, out traveling, who owns it, says, you know what, I better go ahead and do the Truman Meiser, and then I can go ahead and you make use of all the rest of the produce before it gets ruined by the rain. And at the same time, the guy in Israel who's watching one of his crops for him says, oh, the rain is coming, I better go ahead and sell it to protect the guy's investment. So they're both happening at basically the same time because of the same problem.
That could very well occur. But the timing of when he gives, yeah, you're right. But the timing of when the owner gives Truma Maser is you do it at the earliest opportunity, but there is not like a designated date.
Right, but he had some reason. Maybe he was waiting to see how much came in different fields, and all of a sudden now the rains are coming. He's like, I better take care of it now before, because otherwise the Cohen won't get his stuff.
Right, exactly. So they could very well, and if you miss that timing by just a small window, then you really have a tevel problem, because it's no longer in his reshus, because the shomer it took advantage of selling it, and he is being designating on something he doesn't have, which means the rest of his produce is tevel. So that becomes a real issue, becomes a real problem. And so what do you do? So that's the Gemara's kasha here. So the Gemara gives an answer. We touched on this, and here we'll flush it out. So in other words, the shomer instinctively knows, or he's been instructed, that when he sells it, he should sell it. He's not selling it as truma and meiser. In other words, it's not the truma and meiser that the owner is designating, but he is selling it to a kohen b'demei truma. So there is not. So that's I think where we got hung up a little bit. In other words, it is sort of circumcised grain. It's something that no one can eat. Who can eat it? A kohen can eat it, because this would be designated for him anyway. This is the food that would be designated as truma. So the shomer goes ahead and he sells it to another kohen, not necessarily the kohen that the owner would have given it to, because remember, that's a voluntary gift. It's not a sale when he gives truma ma'aser. So he would have given it to Shimon the kohen, but instead Shimon's not around. And the shomer knows, hey, there's another kohen by the name of Levi who I know can eat this. I'm going to sell this to him at a reduced price, because only he can buy it. So the Gemara says, you know what? There's a way out of this problem, because we're not going to have tevel here, because the food stuff that was not yet designated will only be in the reshus of a kohen. And that's okay, says the Gemara, right? The Kohanim b'dmei truma, mezvina lehu. So the teretz the Gemara gives as to why you can sell it and how to resolve the problem is by selling it to another kohen. Now, when the owner wakes up and says, I want to go ahead and designate my produce to a kohen, it's already in the hands of a kohen. So that takes care of that issue, and therefore the rest of the food is not tevel, because it is a kohen who is in control of that truma and meiser. That's how the Gemara really tries to answer the question, and says, I'm satisfied with that answer, that nothing was done and no one was harmed, no harm, no foul, no one was harmed. The right person, i.e. a kohen, got the truma and meiser, and even though the owner missed the boat in terms of timing, he didn't miss the boat in terms of the produce being in the right person's hands, because it's in the hands of a kohen. Therefore, all his other produce in the other jurisdiction, the major produce that he has in another city, is all kasher, so to speak. It's all given truma meiser, and therefore he does not have a problem. That's how the Gemara wants
the
to
owner,
answer.
excuse me, Rabbi, the owner here isn't the one that designated it for truma and meiser. It came that way
But,
through
but de facto, you're right. But de facto,
it's not even the same
is truma.
coin. It's not even the same coin.
No.
So how does he get credit for giving?
Because when push comes to shove, you're right. He didn't designate it. It was the shomer who sold it as truma. He sold it as truma. So we're saying that b'shas hadchak. Now, this isn't necessarily the best case scenario, but it's a scenario that allows us to say that we accomplished the underlying result of putting it in the hands of a truma, an appropriate truma person. I know it's not going to be exactly what we want, but it's not going to open the door to Tevel. It's not going to open the door to Tevel. That's the big concern. The big concern
Rabbi,
is the rest of the world is going to eat Tevel.
right? It seems like this would be a case of where the ends justify the means. Because at the end of the day, we're concerned that maybe the owner designated as Truman Maser, and then so now it's being sold, and now you could be selling Truman Maser. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this field that this shomer is watching only ends up in the hands of a Kohen.
That's right.
Whether he's selling it to the Kohen, whether it was given to a Kohen will have it.
Right.
So if it was designated Truman Maser, a Kohen, granted it's not the Kohen that the owner chose, but a Kohen will be eating what could be Truman
Maser. That's
Maser.
better than not having it.
Right. So like you said, Shasat Chak, I think is the best term. It's definitely not the preferable way to do it, but it helps to guarantee that only a Kohen will be eating what could be Truma.
At a minimum, it's been done.
I get that.
Right. Now comes the big question. If in fact that's an appropriate thing to do, albeit not the best, now the kasha is Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. According to Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, who says you cannot, that he can't sell it. Therefore, the owner always feels comfortable that he can give Truma Meiser. Namin is Vidin Kohanim. Why do you say earlier we said Rav Nachman Yitzchak says in the Tanakama you can't sell it lo yiga behen because of Truma Meiser? What's the problem? There's Vidin Kohanim b'demei Truma.
Right.
So then Rav Nachman can be answered also. Rav Nachman, who says you can never give it away. Why don't you give it away? Just give it away to a Kohen. Just like we saw in this particular brisa, that they gave it away to a Kohen, albeit not the Kohen he wanted, right? But that suffices in taking away the mantle of Tevel. Let Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak say the same thing. Let's just make sure if Tevel is the biggest concern, we already can vitiate the Tevel problem by giving it away, by selling it to another Kohen. Why does Rav Nachman not embrace that answer? If it's good enough for the brisa, why does Rav Nachman not answer? That's really the question here that we're pointing at. So
excuse me,
says the
Rabbi.
Gemara, no. There's a difference between the brisa and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. What is it? Bahai Pligi. This is the machlokes and between the two. The Rabbi Baruch Chana Savar. Rabbi Baruch Chana, his position is he says that when we designate that whether it's rice or barley or a fruit or whatever it is, and we say that this is its deterioration point and no further is loy shechiach midi. He takes a very strict approach and says if 10% is what a food stuff has shrinkage, then 10% it is, and it never goes beyond 10%. Lo shchiach, it doesn't happen. You can keep the produce sitting there, and the worst that'll happen is it'll get to 10% shrinkage or 10% destruction. Right. And if now, remember the question was, and if it happens, let's say, okay, you say it doesn't happen, but let's say once in a blue moon, it gets beyond that destruction point, right? It takes a long time for it to inch its way beyond the 10%, let's say, shrinkage line. So in other words, he takes the position, it never happens. But if it happens in such a long time that that if the owner would think of giving Truma Amaisa from that batch of produce, it would definitely be before the shomer sold it because of excessive shrinkage. Okay, so what do we have here? It shrinks 10%. That's it. It doesn't go beyond. If you will say possibly it does go beyond, it'll take 6 months more to go to 11%. In that 6 months, the owner is going to go ahead and designate Truma and Masa, and he'll be correct because it'll be in his possession. He will be owning it, and he says, you know what? I want to give Truma Maser from this batch, and we don't have to worry that the Shomer is going to sell it because the Shomer is perfectly fine. It's 10%. It's okay. Now, 6 months later, if he happens to say, oh my gosh, it's now gone to 11 or 12%, I'm going to do something here. Who cares? I mean, it's already been given Truma. And let's say it's still sitting there with the Shomer, and he says, the owner left it in my possession. It's not supposed to shrink more than 10, but now it's at 11 or 12. I'm going to sell it, but it's already given Truma. He already gave Truma on it. There's no problem if he then sells it. So therefore, we're not worried about the possibility of that it will be pre-sold before Truma Masa. Yeah, Jay.
So we have an assumption here that the whole field has to decay at the same rate. It could be that part of the field is not decaying rapidly, and the Shomer says, "Look, for the part that's really decaying quickly, I'm going to sell that and not sell the other."
But that's good enough to cover the rest of the field. Once you see, the point is that Muchsa Kukula, a little bit, it takes care of everything. So if he's holding produce that stops at 10%, then he knows I'm good. I can sell this, that the owner will go ahead and designate Truma Maser because I'm not selling it. Once he sells it, which would be many months later, the owner will have already used that produce that the Shomer is holding. He will have used that produce as his surrogate for Truma Maser.
But the owner doesn't know which part of the field he sold. He doesn't sell.
Again, the owner is on a chazaka that nothing deteriorates more than 10%, and therefore that's why the Gemara says he's assured that he can do Truma and Maser because no one will touch, his Shomer will never touch that food. Therefore, he can decide today, tomorrow, or next week, I'm giving Truma Maser because I'm worry-free that food will be pre-sold. The Gemara says, if, however, it drags on, which it normally doesn't, but it drags on months and months, and the owner has not yet given Truma Maser, then we're not worried because within that 6-month period, we're saying as a matter of course, he will definitely have given Truma Maser. We're not worried that he's going to stretch it out a year or an extraordinary period of time. Therefore, since it's not normal for the shrinkage to occur more than the normal 10%, but if it should do it, it would take such a very long time that for sure by then the owner would have already given Truma Maser, and therefore we don't have a tevel problem. That's Rab Nachman, that's Rabbi Bar Chana's position. We're going to see that that's not Rab Nachman's position. So Rabbi Bar Chana says it doesn't happen. But if it happens once in a blue moon where shrinkage goes by 11%, it'll be so far down the road that the owner will surely have made a designation, and therefore there's no tevel issue. And remember, that's our focus. Is there going to be a tevel issue here? No, there will never be a tevel issue because it won't happen in any reasonable amount of time for the owner not to have already given Truma Maser. That's the position of Rabbi Bar Chana. So that's why he says selling it to another Kohen is okay because that can solve a problem. But we're again in the extreme, in the very, very extreme. Okay, so let's go. Therefore, okay, now if it actually gets to be more than that 10%, then he can sell it to Kohen b'dmei truma because by then, for sure, the owner will have already designated. So that's the brisa. What about Rav Nachman? Why doesn't Rav Nachman by Yitzchak hang his hat on the same principle? However, take a look. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Savar Yosem Michdei Chesroina and Mashkech Shchiach. That deterioration beyond the normal point is a frequent occurrence. In other words, it's not a rare occurrence. It's a frequent occurrence. Frequently, produce deteriorates beyond that sort of 10% level. and let's say deterioration happens almost right away, then that's when it happens. And if the shomer says, "Oh, I must quickly sell this because it's already deteriorating beyond 10%," zimnin the kodem mizavanle. So sometimes he'll quickly sell it before the balabayas, before the real owner can make truma maser. Because according to Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, shrinkage, excessive shrinkage happens quickly. So he will then have sold it. The owner won't know, and he's going to say, "You know what? Today is a good day for me to make this truma maser." He didn't know that yesterday the shomer already sold it because shrinkage occurred beyond the 10%, and because there was no communication. He won't know that the shomer sold it, and therefore he will have eaten tevel. So now what we're left with is the machlokes between Rabbi Rechana and Rav Nachman is dependent on whether they consider shrinkage to be excessive shrinkage to be rare or frequent. If you say it's rare, then we understand that that's why he's not worried about making truma and masa on produce, because there will never be a situation where he'll be undermined. But if you say shrinkage happens quickly, he can be undermined and not even know it, and therefore he'll be selling. He'll be designated truma maser on what is already tevel. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Isn't it uncommon for the Gemara to be arguing on, I guess, teva, not tevel, but teva? In other words, it seems like they're having a fundamental argument on what actually happens on produce. Does it happen quickly or does it happen over time? It just seems that doesn't seem to be a common argument. You have farmers; they were all farmers back then. So either it happens quickly or it doesn't. But it's not like they're saying in certain areas it may, unless they're simply coming from different areas where depending on the weather.
That's a very good point. They seem to be arguing on something that might or should be somewhat objectively evaluated, whether or not shrinkage happens quickly or not. And yet the Gemara tells us that this whole machlokes is dependent on their view on whether or not shrinkage happens. And maybe you're right; they're from slightly different parts of the geography, and in some cases maybe the rains are excessive and causes accelerated
more immediate shrinkage.
Right. But you're right it's a machlokes. The machlokes is on something that might otherwise be an objective determination, but we don't know.
Interesting.
So, but the Gemara tries to answer and say that that's the reason why Rav Nachman can't rely on selling truma to a third person, is because of the fact that he believes shrinkage can happen quickly. Therefore, the confusion between the owner and the shomer can happen more likely, and it's more likely than it might otherwise be that he will designate truma maser after he already sold it, and it'll be tevel. So that's how he comes out. Again, maybe it may.
Rabbi, this discussion happened in Bavil, right? It didn't happen
in Bava, right?
So
and they were all Bava, right?
Everything else is very different in
Bava. No, would be different, right. So, nevertheless,
why would they apply? Yeah. Would they apply the same arguments if it was in Eretz Yisrael?
Well, again,
the owner may have land in Eretz Yisrael.
He may have land in Eretz Yisrael.
That he can designate that land for Truma Maisa.
No, but so that may be his land for which he wants everybody to partake, but the portion that he's going to designate as Truma Masa on behalf of that land could be elsewhere. In other words, that might be in Bavel. In other words, there's no prohibition from taking produce that he owns in Bavel and say, this is Truma Masa, therefore my produce in Eretz Yisrael is now Gemaser, and anybody can take it. You're not constrained by the border to say, I'm not allowed to give Truma Maser for Eretz Yisrael in Chutz La'aretz. Why? I own the whole thing. And if I want to designate the Truma Maser, I want to do this on behalf of what I own.
Wait. Truman Maaser is an obligation on stuff in Eretz Yisrael.
Right,
And there's certain areas surrounding Eretz Yisrael where it was a question maybe, and you would go ahead and do Truman Maaser, I have doubt.
right.
But if you actually grew the stuff in Bavel, there's no obligation Truman Maaser. So even if you were going to do it as a nice thing, it wouldn't. How would that cover the stuff that's midoraisa?
Well,
And the Gemara doesn't have any information related to which land the land is located in.
that's right. The Gemara doesn't actually tell us. It's an interesting question, but the Gemara does not tell us that he has to specifically designate what he owns in Eretz Yisrael for Eretz Yisrael. But the question you're asking is, so if it's not required to be Truma Maisha, how can it be a shaliach for the produce that's in Eretz Yisrael, for which Truma Meiser is a deraisa? That's a good question.
Rabbi, I don't know if this is relevant here, but the term deposited produce is used in the translation. And if we do not realize that it had already been sold, therefore the designation did not take effect, the owner will then unwittingly tevel. To protect against this possibility, the Chachamim prohibited the sale of deposited produce in any event. What exactly does this deposited produce mean? Does that have any relevance here with this part of the discussion?
The positive produce.
Positive, that's a term they use.
That means you were given to a shomer.
Oh, that it's in the
That's
hands of
what
a
it sounds
shomer,
like
is that
to
what it
me.
means?
Shomer.
It was given to a showman, so that's what the shomer is holding. You're saying.
So here, if they prohibited that, no shomrim could be involved in this. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what he means by positive, but the other question really is interesting is this Gemara makes no distinction. Right, yeah, you're right. It was written. This Gemara is in Bavel. So in Bavel, he was holding produce. He was holding produce for that, or he was on the border or whatever, for which he was designating Truma and Meiser, so that the rest of his produce could be delivered without it being considered tevel. So the question is, does that fly? Does it actually fly? The answer is yes, but the question you're asking, why should it be? Because it's not. It wasn't a required Truma Masa. He didn't have to give Truma Masa. The teretz is that for this particular owner, the food that he's given for Truma Masa does not necessarily have to have been food that was Truma Masa was chal. I mean, that's the answer. The answer is that if he owns produce in different sectors and that some of it is out of Eretz Yisrael, and that out of Eretz Yisrael would not be mechuyev, that in and of itself wouldn't be mechuyev. But remember, what he's doing if he's selling it to another Kohen in Chutz La'aretz, or not. I mean, the Gemara doesn't tell us that he sold it to the Kohen who happened to be in Chutz La'aretz, but he sold it to another Kohen. We don't know where that Kohen is. That Kohen could be in Eretz Yisrael, or it could be.
That's why I was getting at the uncertainty of which ground are we talking about?
Which ground are we talking about? But we have to be talking about Chutz La'aretz because these Amoraim were all situated in Bavel. I mean, so they're not necessarily, unless they're theorizing their whole machlekes on Eretz Yisrael and saying this whole discussion is based on as if we were, even though we're in Bavel, then
that's what it would seem to me, because otherwise talking about Truma Meiser in this very serious way just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And it's a lot because everything until now we're talking about, returning lost objects and watching things and so on in general. Not talking about Truma Meiser applies equally anywhere, but this would have to be Yisrael specific.
Yeah. So the Gemara doesn't generalize, but I will take a look and see if the Mefarshim talk about. That's not something that I came across, but you may be right. You may be right that this whole somewhat remote discussion in Bavel was the Amoraim clearing in Eretz Yisrael where you have to Maser. Here's the sequence of events, so that this whole story takes place in Eretz Yisrael, even though the discussion is in Bava. Okay, so yeah, all right. I will take a look at that and see how that plays out. But let's go a little bit weiter because we really want to move into to the next sugya. Okay, Meisvei. So now the Gemara brings down another brisa. We have another brisa related to this, and we're going to discuss again Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak. Amafkid peres yesel chavero. If someone gives peres to his friend to hold, we hear kivu and they spoil. Yain the hechmitz, wine that becomes, I guess, vinegar, or in other words, it deteriorates. Shemen the hivish, oil that becomes rancid. Devash the hidvish. In other words, all of these foodstuffs spoil to the nth degree. In other words, spoilage is 100% complete. It can't get more spoiled than what we've got. It's not a gradual spoilage, it's a complete spoilage. Okay, so Rashi points that out, that he says the hidvish yotzatam the visha v'hichmetz ubechol tuosu tishvash ta'aker sheveshes v'chamo eid lo yarchek chevel hakesef yiftiku v'chukim. Okay, basically what he's saying that it has now, with all of these in this brisa, they have spoiled completely, 100%. No possibility. So says the brisa, and this is the chiddush, harizelo yiga behen. Notwithstanding divrei Rab Meir in this brisa is the Tanakama, not in our Mishnah. But here Rab Meir says, notwithstanding that it's 100% destroyed, you can't touch it. You can't do anything. Also lahem takana. That so Rashi says lekame mefarish my takana yesh od halokol kilkul ha'osid lovo kvar bohu. The kilkul, the destruction, is so complete that there is no longer a further destruction possible. So what does the Chachamim say? Also in takana, you do something. In other words, you fix it, you make it better. Umocher bebezdin. So this brisa has a machlokes between Rab Meir and the Chachamim. What you do if you are the shomer of food stuff that has totally and completely 100% destroyed. Okay. So okay, so that's the machlokes. Says the brisa further. Okay, so according to the Chachamim, you're allowed to sell it. Who do you sell it to? Says the Gemara, you sell it to others. In other words, you don't sell it to yourself and say, you know what, this is so bad. I'll put the money in the tzedakah box and let me just get rid of it. Says the Gemara, no, you can't do that. This is a digression, if you will. Other examples of the same situation for all the Gabarim amongst us who handle goods and money. What happens if the pushka is full and there is no aniyim? Then partin la'acherim and partin la'atzman. Says Rashi, apparently in those days, the coin for tzedakah was a copper coin, and that coin deteriorated. It was not a stable physical coin. It would become very either slimy or not something that people want to keep in their pockets or use. Says Rashi, upartin machlifin prutos nechoshes, they would exchange copper pennies bisale kesef mipnei shahaprutos bisafshos v'nifsalos. The perutos, the copper coins, deteriorated into something that was not pleasant. So therefore, the more they could exchange, let's say 100 prutos for one silver coin, they would do so. You know, so to keep the silver coins in the pushka, not the copper. Says the Gemara, same principle. They would only exchange it out to others, and they wouldn't. In other words, the gabbai tzedakah cannot take advantage of anything, and this would be taking advantage because he would be getting a better coin, so to speak. So he's not allowed to do it. And the Gemara says further, Brisa says further, Gabi Tamchui, what happens if the kitchen had food for aniyin, they're not going to let it spoil. They took the food from the pot and they sold it to different people so that people would have food because they couldn't give it away. There too, he can't sell it to himself. Even though the price is an objective amount, it's a seller for let's say a pound of food or whatever. He shouldn't do it. This, by the way, is the principle of Maris Ayin, that a gabbai tzedakah. That's why we say gabbai tzedakah b'shtayim. There should never be a circumstance where a gabbai is handling anything of the public's by way of tzedakah by himself, so that no one should be choshed that he is doing some kind of exchange on his behalf. So that is something that every gabbai needs to be very, very mindful of, is that, someone is always going to be concerned, are you taking advantage? So this is a digression from our brisa, but nevertheless, the Gemara says, you should never sell anything to yourself, even if you're going to give top dollar, because of Maris Ayin. So you should always sell it. Okay, that's an aside. That's what the Gemara says. Katani miyos, but nevertheless, we learned in our brisa, payers for kivu, what's the story about payers that are fully destroyed? My lava fili yesemichdechesroinan. Don't you think we're saying that it even is beyond? Of course, we're talking about where it's beyond the normal shrinkage. Yesemichdechesroinan. So and still we say that you can't sell it. It's a kasha on Reb Meir. Reb Meir says in the Brisa that if you have yain hechmet shemen dehevish harizeh lo yiga behem divrei mecham osalim takana emochren. Here we see that you can't sell it. So don't you think you're talking about a fili yesem michtei chesronan? So it's like, no, michtei chesronan. We're only talking about kidei chesronan, the normal amount of shrinkage, and therefore he is allowed to, if it becomes more than the normal amount of shrinkage, he's allowed to give it away. Reb Meir would admit. Remember, we say that Nachman Yitzchak says, may he pronounced in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that the whole principle of not selling is only when it's within the normal scope. But beyond the normal scope, he would sell. So the Gemara says, don't you think we're talking about afilu yesem mechdei chesronan, and still he says he can't sell? He says no, lo mechdei chesronan, that it's only mechdei chesronan that you can't sell, but Yosha you can. In fact, the Gemara of Ahoyayin, the Hichrit, Shemen, the Hivish, the Vash, the Hidvish, the Yosha mechdei chesronan inu. The Brisa is talking about a case where there is 100% destruction, 100% shrinkage. So how can you tell me that the machlokes the machlokes is only in kedei chesronan, but if Yosef mechdei chesronan, even Reb Meir would admit that of course you can sell it, and all these things that we said about Kav Shalom, Betisha Kav, all of these things go away when it's Yosef mechdei chesronan, because no one wants to have an excessive loss. Here we see in the Brisa that the whole thing got destroyed, and still Reb Meir says you cannot touch it. So how do you reconcile Rav Nachman in the name of Rabbi Yochanan's principle that everybody would admit that in the case of excessive shrinkage, of course you can sell it because no one wants to take a big loss. And here in the Brisa says beferish that in all of these situations where the shrinkage was 100% total, you're not allowed. Reb Meir still says you're not allowed to touch it. How do you reconcile that? That's the Gemara's kasha. Says Rashi, and the Havamina was that, don't you think we're talking about even more than the normal? and yet we say that you can't touch it. But we thought that we already had the word that everybody says when it's more than chesronan that you're allowed to sell it. So now the Gemara is going to make a chilek. The Gemara is going to say, Shani Hani, our brisa here that we just learned about, where all these things were destroyed totally and completely, given the come, since it reached the point of no return, because it's 100% destroyed. So now he's saying, what's the point in selling it? Now I understand. Rabbi Meir says, Lo yiga behem, because what are you going to gain? It's 100% destroyed. So don't bother selling it. In other words, if it was 10% shrinkage and it reached 15% and you can salvage 85%, okay, then we say Rabbi Meir would admit, yes, you should go ahead and do that because there's still much more shrinkage to come and you're going to preserve it from that excessive shrinkage. But here the Brisa says that it got destroyed to its totality. There is no longer any more possibility of more shrinkage, 100%. The why lo yigabehem? Okay, well, at that point, what's the point? Says the Gemara. No, there is still a point. So Frank, the Gemara, if it's already totally destroyed, then it has no usefulness. What's the usefulness? So the Gemara wants to give an answer. Shemen vehivish, dvash vehivish. Look at Amud Beis. Lamai. What good is it? So he says, Shemen chaze shemen chaze legiloi. Dvash lechatisha degamale. That shemen, even though it's 100% rancid and 100% destroyed, it still can be rubbed on leather and other things and make it supple. In other words, you can't use it. It probably doesn't smell good or whatever. But Rashi says, "L'gloi l'sach oiros," to invigorate or to rub into skin. In other words, the skin of animals can be softened even by rancid oil. And dvash lechatisha, what about this honey that has become totally spoiled? So he says, lechatisha degamale, lechatisha shalagamo, you rub it on the hump of the camel, shagav kitush umasukov machmas masoi, because the camel becomes sore because of the burden that it's carrying. So even though you can't use the dvash, you still rub it on the hump of the gamal, and it gives it some relief. Anyway, what the Gemara is telling us is that it still does have some value, even though it's completely and totally deteriorated. Therefore, he says, in other words, you shouldn't use it because it still has some value. And therefore, Rameir takes the shita that you don't. Also lehem takana, but yet the Chacham says you make a takana and you try to sell it b'mochin bebezdin. My takanta. What takanta is there? What can you do to improve the properties of that particular thing since it's already totally deteriorated? Says the Gemara. My takanta ovid lo amarav ashi lekankanin. There is a takanta for the barrels. In other words, even though you can no longer salvage the actual produce because it's 100% destroyed, that brisa comes to tell us that the Chacham say, nevertheless, you may sell it. You make a takanta, you improve. What do you improve? You get rid of it so that the barrels don't get destroyed. In other words, the longer you keep that rancid oil or the davash that has gone sour or whatever into the barrels, it seeps into the barrels, and the barrels then have to be thrown away because they have this smell or this taste of the product that can no longer, you can't get rid of it. So if you want to put fresh oil in, the fresh oil will become smelly and rancid because of what's already in the walls of the kankana. So the machlokes between Rav Meir and the Chachamim is that Rav Meir says that you can't, even though it cannot deteriorate more than it already has, it's 100%, still it has a use to rub the camel or to soften the skin. Therefore, Rav Meir says you can't sell it. you're not allowed to sell it because it has a use. The Chachamim say, I still want to salvage. What am I salvaging? It's all spoiled. She says, what you're salvaging is the kankanim, and therefore you're allowed to salvage the kankanim. So that brisa that we just read, with the machlokes of the Meir and the Chachamim, has to do with whether or not there is still any value to a produce, to a product that has completely been destroyed. So the mayor says no, therefore you can't touch it, because what's the point in selling it? You can't do anything with it. Even though you can use it for certain things, I'm not allowing you to do it. The Chachamim say that you are allowed to because you are still salvaging. Frek the Gemara b'mai kol miflage. What's the machlokes between Rav Meir and the Tanna Kama? Why do they take those different positions? The Mar Sovar, Rav Meir holds lehefsid meruva choshishu. Our major concern is hefsid meruba, is major loss, and major loss no longer happens when you have certain produce that has deteriorated 100%. Yes, they're okay. You can still use it to soothe the camel or to soften the leather, but that's not a major thing. So he holds, again, this is a machlokes in theory here as to what's the point? Why should I, if the owner told me hold on to it, says Meir, he meant for me to hold on to it, not to get rid of. If I get rid of, I have a valid use for it. He says that's not hefsid meruba. The hefsid meruba already happened. The major loss happened because the devash or the shemen or the yayin went completely spoiled. So there's no longer, the hefsid meruba is gone. Therefore, there's no justification for selling it, even if you can help the camel or use it for the skin. So we only choshish hefsid meruba and the hefsid lo choshishu. And since the hefsid meruba already happened, so therefore Rav Meir says you don't sell it because all we're dealing is minor loss. What's the minor loss? Oh, he can sell it for pennies because someone can use it for the camel, as an example. Umar Sova and the Rabbanan hold afila lehefsid muet nami choshishu, that we are also cognizant and concerned about hefsid muet, a little bit of a loss. And here, according to the Chachamim, there would be a little bit of a loss. What would be that? The kankanim. The kankanim can still be spoiled. So even though that's almost insignificant in terms of the value of the kankanim to the value of the oil or the shemen or the devash or whatever, nevertheless, there is even some loss, and therefore the Chachamim in this brisa say that also lehem takana umachrim bebezdin, even though it's a pittance literally, but still, since you can save the kankanim, we allow him to do it. So Rashi points that out and says the kankanim hakli shubatochi skalkem and misha besocho. If you allow the spoiled food stuff to remain, then even the kankanim, which have some value, will also be spoiled. What do they argue? If it's huge loss, that I worry about. But hefsid mu'it, kagam b'chdei chesronan, the rekivan pairs for kulkul kankanim, the yai and the hechmetz, that I'm not worried about. Whereas the Chachamim say even hefsid mu'it is a loss. A small amount is also a loss, and therefore we don't want him to take a loss. Okay, so
Rabbi, the principle of this is you sit on it until it totally gets spoiled, and then at the end of it, you can make a decision while it's spoiling the containers that are in there. You do nothing to preserve it. You do nothing to do that, and you wait till the end, and then you still can't sell it, and so you don't preserve anything. I just don't understand the logic.
Okay, so
jumping from the beginning to the end. We can talk about it next time.
No. So the answer, really, the nuts and bolts of that question is what obligation, if you give me something to hold without instructions, say, I want you to hold this for me, and you give me no instruction, what latitude do I have to do something on your behalf? So the machlokes is in a sense, lahavdil, we say you're either a strict constructionist or you're not a strict constructionist. If you're a strict constructionist and you say, which is the Tanakama and in this Brisa of Meir, you, Michael, gave me something to hold on to. You gave me no instruction to sell it. I'm not going to sell it. There's something that's going to be, something's going to happen to it. I can't do anything. I'm powerless.
I can't even preserve it. I can't do anything to do that. I'm going to watch it deteriorate till the end.
Right. So in other words, he has tunnel vision, and he says that I'm following the instruction of what Michael told me. He told me, hold on to this. He didn't tell me, hold on to it for a day. Hold on to it until it gets partially destroyed. Hold on to it until it gets 3/4 destroyed. So I have to abide by the only thing I know. I'm a shomer, I'm holding on to it. Now, it's a very narrow view, and you can argue that that's kind of foolish, but you see that Reb Meir and the Tanakama, in the case of the Mishnah, again, we gave reasons. Rav Kana said the reason was because of Tisha Kab and Shalom, another Kab Shalom, that a person rather have his own spoiled produce than someone else's. Okay, you can argue all day that what good is it going to be if it's 100% or 99% destroyed? I still have my own. What that's silly. But again, we're kind of constricted in what we can do. The Tanakama, on the other hand, or Reb Shimon ben Gamliel in the Mishnah, says, wait a minute, you're a shomer, you got to use some seichel here. And if the seichel tells you that the owner only meant to give it to me to hold so that I should be a good Samaritan. But am I a good Samaritan when it's about to be destroyed 50%, 60%? Am I doing this guy a favor? So I'm going to take license and I'm going to do it on my own. So this machlokes, by the way, is a deeper machlokes on our obligation to follow the instructions that were given to the person. It's not so much this particular case, whether it gets destroyed. It's the principle of, I gave you instruction. What's my obligation to follow your instruction? Is there a point in time when I can take license and say, I know my friend Michael gave it to me and what he meant, but I'm interpreting that what he meant was this, and I'm going to do that.
I would have been a little more comfortable
So
seeing
this
the
whole
words
thing-
"lifnei meshuras adin" somewhere in this.
Right. No, I think all of those issues come to the fore. Are you a good friend? And because you're a shomer chinam, basically, you're saying, I want to do good by my friend, because my friend maybe didn't anticipate it would be so bad, so I'm going to help him. But later on, the friend will come back and say, did I ask you to sell it? I wanted it in its pure, unadulterated, destroyed form for some other reason. And you went ahead and sold it. Did I tell you to sell it? So this machlokes is a larger discussion of what achrayus a shomer has when someone, to the point of destruction of the product, when someone says, do this for me. This is really what the discussion here in the Gemara is all about, regardless of all the nuances that we've been talking about the last few weeks. The underlying question is, what achrayus does the shomer have to protect his friend?
All right.
If it
Right?
wasn't shomer chinam, if it was a different kind of shomer, you'd have a whole new Gemara.
Then you might have a different discussion. Exactly. But he was a mafkid. He gave him a pekadon. He said, do me a favor, take my pekadon and hold it for me. Now, if I don't have any instruction on what to do with the pekadon, then I'm kind of lost. What did he want from me? Did he want me to hold it to no end, even though it started to get destroyed? Or do I take license? That's really the discussion of this Gemara.
Yeah.
All right, but there's, I see something else here, which is previous to this Gemara, as in, just even the last session, I thought we're talking about piles of grain or, baskets of fruit, things like that.
Those are the examples. Those are the examples, right?
Right, but now we've got examples which are barrels of wine and of oil and so on. And a couple of things. I'm not sure about the dvash, but certainly in the case of the wine and the oil, these are processed products. So that's already a step beyond just, harvest the stuff and let it sit to dry or whatever.
Okay.
Now I understand that you don't have the grapes just sit there. You go and press them immediately to start the wine process going, and similar with the oil. But so that's number one. Number two, though, is if this stuff is sitting in barrels,
It's invisible.
exactly, it's invisible. You don't know. You're watching to make sure things don't leak. If things leak, if you start seeing leakage, then you're going to deal with it, fix the barrels or check the status and so on. But short of that, you're going to let the stuff sit while you're watching. And you're not
Yeah,
doing
but there's probably a smell to it, Menashe, where all of a
right.
sudden.
But by the
you're smelling
time,
rancid
right,
stuff.
that's the thing. All of a sudden, it's not like you've got this warehouse full of grain and you start to notice, you pass by a little bit of moldy, you see rats scurrying around, whatever. And so you know there's starting to be some problems. Oh, maybe I should sell it before it gets too bad. The wine, it might be that all of a sudden one day you pass by and, oh, it smells a little funny. You open it up and you taste it. Oh, it's vinegar. The whole batch is probably bad at that point, which fits with this Gemara here today.
Right.
And so it's a different thing because now you don't have the chance to say, I'm going to save 80% or 90%.
Right.
It's literally in one day gone from good to bad.
And you're exactly right. And that's why this is a different brisa. Now we have two different brises to evaluate. One, as you pointed out, where there was gradual deterioration, and that's the machlokes between the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. And then in the second brisa between Reb Meir and the Chachamim is when, you're right, all of a sudden I walk by and I say, wait a minute, there's nothing to salvage here. So we do have two different case studies.
But they fit together.
They fit
because
together.
you can emerge. At first, you're worried about Truman Maser, and it
Right.
could get to the point where it gets beyond that quality. So that
Right.
was the first stage, and
That's
then it
right.
gets beyond this. So it does fuse together, and the question is it different as it goes through those
No,
stages?
so you're right. It's two different cases with the same question. What achrayus does the nifgad, does the shomer have to salvage, whether it's 80% or nothing? In other words, you're right. These are two separate cases. There's two separate machlokes which parallel each other. And the question is there a difference between 100% destruction and 80% or 50%?
But Rabbi,
But
isn't
more
it
importantly,
there-
if he's selling it before the Bezdin, which is a fact-finding body, what is the achrayus of the Bezdin in a case like this?
Right. So
There's a full disclosure.
Okay, so you have the wise men of the Bezdin who are sitting there taking the decision out of the Nifgad's hands and saying, you Nifgad, you brought it to us, thank you. We're going to now evaluate what should we do for this person. We're not going to put the achrayus on you to make a decision to sell or not. That's why he says, also the Chacham say, also hem takana, and go to Bezdin. Make a takana, fix it. Go to Bezdin. You yourself, you're paralyzed. You don't know what to do.
Right, but also on top, though, when I saw the thing here that said based, and you know, we had it before, I thought right back to the previous section where we said he can't sell it to himself, even though he's in the business of this stuff and would give a good price and everything else. Can't sell it to Bezdin, then it gets
totally
beyond
out of
question.
his hand, and the Bezdin can make an objective decision what to do with it. That's why he said also hem takana. You're absolutely right. So we do have, Michael, two parallel cases.
Yes, but one last point, Rabbi, and maybe I'm wrong about this. The Kedusha of Truman Maser, isn't that a higher Kedusha than when it goes to the next level? So if you risk it, leaving that Kedusha, the fact that it's going to be done, as God instructs us.
Right.
And you let it get past that, haven't you gone to a level that is beyond what you should let it? Shouldn't that be a line of demarcation?
Well, you're right. So that's why in the first series of cases, the Nifgat said, wait a minute, I know that this fellow wants to give Truma Maser, but I also know that this thing is starting to rapidly deteriorate, and there may come a point in time where he can no longer give Truma Maser. I'm going to take the bull by the horns. I'm going to sell it. And I'm going to sell it without even him knowing it. So therefore, he can, but he's competing against the principle.
Lose any money.
But the thing is, Rabbi, you said in the first cases I recall, he didn't know whether he intended to give Truma Maser over this. So it is an if, it's a contingency, and you're trying to say, do I need to be contingent to that level? Because if I let it go, I've lost that opportunity for the produce. So
it's all about assumptions. We have to have assumptions.
But you again, the point that you make is very valid, because in the case of Truma Maser, the Nifgad, the one who's holding it, presumably knows that his owner, the guy, the friend, wants to give Truma Maser. So, but he has to make a quick decision. Do I sell this before it is no longer Truma or Maserable? So he says, you know what? I can't reach my friend. There's no phone. There's no internet. I'm going to quickly sell this to salvage. The friend, the guy who owns it, says, my good friend, he's just holding on to it. I'm going to give Truma and Maser, and therefore it'll be fine. So the conflict there is because not knowing can produce, like you say, a Isser and Heter Isser, a question of Tevel, a question of Trumas and Masers, and that puts it on one plateau, puts it on a higher level of conflict than the case where there is not a Truma Maser issue. It's strictly financial, and he has a barrel full of oil and a whatever it is that you keep the vash in, and all of his economic value is now lost. It has nothing to do with Kedusha. It's strictly a question of, okay, I'm sorry, I held on to it too long. I lost you money. I apologize. So then the question is, now that I've done that and I've caused you harm, that machlekes is there still something to salvage? Not Kedusha Tara.
Okay, but you've gotten it to that level. Can you let it go? That's why I think they're different arguments. You have to make a call, and this is a like you said, a higher madrega. You can't let it go to that second tier. You have to make that decision beforehand.
Right.
So they're different level, like you said. One is just a pure financial.
No, you're exactly right, which is why both cases are mentioned in the Gemara, because otherwise it would be a repetitive discussion if it was identical to the case of Truma Maser. So the Gemara is trying to tell you we have a machlekes between Tanakama and Rav Shimon Gamliel on Truma Maser. We've exhausted that study. Now I want to introduce to you a different case, not identical, a different case that has nothing to do with Truma Maser. It has just an economic impact. And what's the story of the economic impact? And the Gemara says there's also a machlekes between a Tanakama and in this case the Chachamim as to whether the economic impact, not Kedusha issue, whether the economic impact has an effect on what you do. Rabbi says no, and the Chachamim say yes.
But there is one difference between the two, and that is, in the case of Truma Maser, you're only worried about the product. You're not worried about the storage it's in. When you get to the pure financial, you're looking at the totality of the financial, which includes the barrels or whatever it's being held into, as well as the produce itself. So you're in a different bailiwick.
So I'm presuming, Michael, that the tuvua, in the Truma Maser case, is also in barrels, but will not be spoiled if it goes from 10% to 12% to 15%. The barrels will never be in jeopardy, assuming there are barrels, because it could also be oil or wine or something. It doesn't have to be just grain. You can give Truma Maser from other things. So let's just say that we've never reached the point of no return on the kankanim portion, as we want to say. So we're not even addressing it. In the second brisa, it got so bad, there was nothing left to salvage. Now we're into the kankanim. Do you still have any reason to just let it sit forever until the owner says dump it, or still salvage it because there are kankanim that can be salvaged?
But the difference is that it's merging. You're looking at it as though you got it in that condition. You got it with less than 10% spoilage in case one. You got it, at the end with total spoilage in case two. So it's not the emergence of that. You're saying at that point, what do I do? Right. That's very different than watching it traverse through each of its levels.
Yeah, no, they are. I agree with you. There are separate cases that have different connotations, and therefore the Gemara brought both of those cases down because they're not quite the same. And the nuance of the Truma Maser is one issue, and the nuance of total economic destruction, having nothing to do with Truma Maser, is another issue for which there is a separate machlokes in a brisa, and for which we conclude that the motivation between Reb Meir the Chachamim had to do with Hefsid Meruba or not. In other words, remember, we've always taken the position in everything that we've learned from the very beginning that one Jew has a responsibility, he has an economic responsibility to his fellow Jew not to have him take an unnecessary monetary loss. In other words, you should be cognizant of your friend's possessions, and you should not allow your friend just to lose everything if you can salvage. So in the second brisa, that becomes the main issue. In other words, do I care if you lose the kankanim? Big deal, you lost the kankanim. So say the Chachamim, no, it's a hefsid mu'it, but it's a hefsid nevertheless. And I, as your friend, as a fellow Jew, I have a responsibility to make sure that you have no loss, even if the loss is a pittance, because how much is that can worth? Okay, a few dollars, but I still have that achrayus. Reb Meir says, you know what? When you balance that loss against the instruction that my balabos gave me not to sell, I have to respect his direction more than the economic value of that vessel. So that's where the machlokes is. In other words, I would rather, if my boss said, don't do anything under any circumstance, I have to assume that he's willing to take that monetary loss with the kankanim, because that's what his instruction was to me, and I have to listen to him. The Chachamim say, no, you can still salvage something for your friend, go to Bezdin, and let the Bezdin dictate what exactly you should do. And in his particular case, the Bezdin will say, you know what, dump the oil, save the barrel, save him the couple of bucks. So what? He told you not to do it? We, the Bezdin, say do it. So in other words, what you see here is the interplay between the individual and Bezdin, but also this larger question that I sort of infuse is that you're an Arev, you're a friend, you're someone that has to take care of your friend, and therefore, if he's in the position of losing money and you can help him by salvaging, you should do that. That's the second machlokes. The first machlokes, as you point out, had nothing to do with that. The first machlokes simply is a question of trumas and meisers as to whether or not a person can take matters into his own hands with regard to the question of truma and maser, when you know that your owner is going to use that for truma and maser. Can I supersede what he wants to do with salvaging something for him? That's the point of the first machlokes. Second machlokes has nothing to do with truma maser. It's strictly a question of whether or not you can intercede on behalf of your friend to salvage something for him or not, and that's the machlokes of Reb Meir and the Chachamim. Okay, so listen, we continue this discussion. It's a fascinating discussion, but Mitzvah Shem will stop here.